I have 5 of these teeny tiny Orphan blocks that I just have to use. These sawtooth stars are only 4.5-inch squares and they are absolutely darling. So let me tell you a little bit about this block. Earlier this year, I made the decision to try to work through a lot of my unfinished projects. And when I was sorting through everything, I came across these little blocks and they are so cute. I don't want to throw them away, but I honestly don't want to make any more of these teeny tiny little stars. So I set them to the side and knew that if I kept them on the ends of my brain, I would come up with an idea finally of how to use them. Now, how these little blocks came to be is I did a video reviewing triangles on a roll. Or is it half square triangles on a roll? One of the triangles on a roll I used and demoed in the video, which I will link in the description below, made these teeny tiny little half square triangles. They are absolutely darling, but I don't always want to work that tiny. I still have a ton of them, and I do have plans for these too. I cannot throw these away. So if you enjoy this video once you get to the end of it, I would love for you to subscribe to my channel, turn on the notification bell, and you'll soon see a video where I use some of these as well. Now, I finally came up with an idea on how to use this block, but incorporate it into something that gets done a little more quickly than making a bunch more of these tiny stars. A few years ago, Brenda from Conquering Mount Scrap More with Brenda put out a very fun video sharing the potato chip block. There are a few different variations you can do with this using different size rectangles, and it just so happens that this size sawtooth star will work perfectly as the center to a potato chip block. I absolutely love this block. It is a lot of fun to make, very, very quick to make. I was just so excited when I realized that this sawtooth star would work perfectly in the middle of the potato chip block. So here's one of the potato chip blocks already finished. It is so cute. I'm so happy with how it turned out. What I did was I cut 2.5 by 4.5 inch rectangles using my Flying Geese trim lock. This trim lock is designed for 2.5 by 4.5 inch Flying Geese blocks to trim them down perfectly. It has diagonal lines here to line up on the seams, but it is also perfect for cutting scraps for this block. I focused on my scraps that were blue, a darker navy, or almost black even, because there is some of those colors in this block. Reds, and I even pulled in some kind of more pinky reds and some creams that all I felt went well with this block. So while it is scrappy, there is kind of a theme to it. So this trim lock made the trimming so easy for getting my scraps ready. I just set the rectangle on the scrap I wanted to cut and then cut around it. The grips on the bottom of the trim lock keep the fabric in place, and I was able to get my scraps cut up very, very quickly. So here's some of the scraps I'm working with. I divided them out, like I said, to my kind of like darker navies, black, the blues that I'm using, reds, kind of the more pink and reds, and then the cream. That just helped me make sure that I'm getting a nice variety in each of my blocks. So since I only had 5 of these stars, I decided to make this into a 9-patch quilt. So the center of the 9-patch is going to have a star, and then the 4 corners. And then the rest of the 9-patch is going to be filled up with just a traditional potato chip block. So one that looks like this. So you can see the star in the center here. This is my potato chip block with a twist. Instead of having those 2 rectangles in the center, I'm going to have the sawtooth star. So here is one of the blocks all laid out. So we have the star in the center, and then the first rectangles we're going to sew together are the two along the side of it. And then we sew the rectangles on the bottom and on the top of it together to sew on. Then the two on the sides we sew together and then sew on, and then we sew the three on the top together, then sew it on, and the three on the bottom together, and then sew it on. I'm telling you, this block comes together so easy. Now, if you want to make this block with the sawtooth star, I will link to the triangles on a roll in the description of this video so that you can sew these cute little half square triangles together very easily. They are tiny. If you want to do them on your own, you definitely can. But I'm telling you, those triangles on a roll definitely will help if you want to make some this small. So I'm going to sew the first rectangle onto the side here so I can show you how to bring this block together. It is so easy. It's the perfect way to use scraps. Even if you don't want to add like a sawtooth star to the center like I am, it's still a really fun block to make if you haven't made it before. And you can make it as scrappy as you want. You could pull fabrics that are all a certain color or just choose certain colors and bring it together. Or you can just grab whatever is in your scrap bin, cut a rectangle and sew it on and just make it super scrappy if you want to. And the fun thing is you can build this block as large as you want to. With the rectangles I am using, this block comes out to 12.5 inches unfinished. So once I sew it together, it will be a 12-inch block. All right, so there is the first step done with the rectangles on the side of my center sawtooth star. I set that back in to the block on the design board I'm using because it helps keep everything organized. I already laid everything out the way I want it to come together. So for me, it just helps keep everything together so I can ensure I sew it together the way I intended. So I'm going to take the two rectangles on top of that segment and sew them together. Press that seam. I go ahead and press the seam with heat. You can just finger press it and work through this block if you want to. Now I'm going to add this onto the top here. I'm going to go ahead and press this with some heat. I set it back over so that I can make sure I'm laying everything out properly. I'm going to sew the next two together. Something that can be helpful too is to take a picture of the block. That way you can refer to it as you sew, because sometimes, you know, once you're sewing it, pressing it, and bring it back over to the design board, you might realize that, oh, you're not really quite sure how you had it laid out. But a photo, you can refer back to it and make sure it's laid out the way you like it. All right, so I pressed that seam and I'm going to add it on to the bottom here. And honestly, you probably are going to see me lay this out a different way. That happens to me sometimes, especially when I'm kind of working quickly or talking while I'm working. But I usually just end up leaving it. It's usually fine. As long as it's not the same two fabrics next to each other, it's okay in my book. All right, so I'm going to press this seam. And you might be noticing something here. You don't really have a bunch of seams that are meeting up together. So I think this block is a lot of fun because you can kind of just press the seams however you want to. It makes it come together even that much easier. All right, so I'm going to sew these two rectangles together and press the seam. Then I'm going to sew it along the side of this block that I'm building. So let me know in the comments if you've made the potato chip block before. I just think it is so much fun to make this block. It is the perfect block for scraps and just to have fun and sit and sew. I made so many of these blocks yesterday as I got all these scraps cut, and they came together so fast. I couldn't stop making them. I was like, I need to save some of these rectangles I cut for the tutorial. All right, so I'm going to sew this one along the side here. And then now you can see we have a big portion of this block sewn together. Now we have 3 rectangles we need to sew together for the top and bottom, and then to sew it on to the block. But this is seriously coming together so fast, isn't it? This is a nice big block when you cut your rectangles this size. Comes together very, very fast. A fun, quick way to use up some scraps. So what are some other blocks that you think would be fun to put in the center of this potato chip block? So I have these seams pressed with heat. I think a pinwheel could be fun as well in the center. You could even get some photos printed on fabric or use those photo transfer papers and put that on some fabric and make a memory quilt. I think would be really fun. All right, so we just need the 3 rectangles sewn onto the bottom. So I'm going to sew those 3 rectangles together first and then attach them to the bottom of this block. All right, so seriously, how cute is this block? If you've followed my channel for any time at all, you know how much I love the Sawtooth Star block. And this teeny tiny block just makes me so stinking happy when I see it because it is just darling. The fabrics in it are just so cute as well. They are actually leftover jelly roll strips from when I made the jean quilt behind me. So this quilt here has the fabric from the star in it as well. And so it makes me so happy to use up those scraps from that quilt in another project. So this jean quilt behind me has some jeans in it and then some jelly roll strips. I do have a tutorial on that quilt as well, so I will link it in the description below as well. So I have quite a few of the blocks I intend to put into this quilt together. Like I said, I'm going to do 9 of these. Just make a cute small little lap quilt, or you know, it'd be a nice like baby size quilt. And These are some of the blocks that don't have the sawtooth star in the center. So I need 4 of those traditional potato chip blocks and 5 of the blocks with the star in the middle. So here is a layout for the traditional potato chip block. This comes together just the same as the other one. Just for the center, we're going to have 2 of these rectangles that are 2.5 by 4.5 that we're just going to sew together and press first. This polka dot fabric reminds me of my friend Amy, who also has a YouTube channel. She puts some polka dot fabric in every single one of her quilts. So here these are pressed together, and then we just keep building this block the same way as we did the other one. Anytime I make a scrappy quilt and post a tutorial video on that quilt, I will always get comments where people say they love the tutorial, they just can't make scrappy quilts, they don't love them, they don't like all the fabrics together, which I completely understand. So if you like this idea but don't want to do the scrappy aspect to it, just get some fabric that you really love, maybe a few yards from a line of fabric that you really love, and bring this quilt together that way. It doesn't have to be scrappy. Anytime you see a scrappy quilt idea, you could always just use fabrics that you have intentionally paired together to bring that quilt together. So I'm going to finish up all of these blocks that I need, and then I will show you the final quilt all brought together. Oh my goodness, look how amazing this quilt top turned out. It is so perfect, and it's such a fun twist on the potato chip block. I feel like those sawtooth star blocks throughout here are just perfect for giving your eye somewhere to rest on this scrappy quilt. I love it so much. So a little tip for you, when you lay out these blocks, make sure that you turn the blocks so that you have a more of a brick wall look along the edges of the blocks. Don't have those seams line up perfectly. You really want that brick wall look when the blocks meet together. Once I sewed each row together, I pressed the seams toward the star blocks so that the seams would nest together when I sew this whole top together. I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I had so much fun using up these Orphan blocks. It felt so good to use up some of those blocks that have been laying around for years now. Now, if you enjoyed this video, I really hope that you hit the like button and consider subscribing and turning on the notification bell so you can see how I use up those tiny leftover half square triangles. I have a fun idea for them, and I really think you will like it. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.